Hello YouTube. The setting for the events I'm about to tell you is very important in our modern world and maybe the focal point of a new major war. South China Sea, the geographic commons of Southeast Asia's navigable rimland. It's 3.5 million square kilometers of underlying bedrock containing oil and natural gas deposits that by official US estimates are at least equal to Mexico's, and by some contested Chinese estimates might be the second only to Saudi Arabia's. Also, it's home to lucrative fisheries and supply routes that carry 80% of China's crude imports. The territorially disputed region may be the most strategically important waterway of the 21st century. Today, the disputes in South China Sea are manifold. For example, in the first instance, there are conflicts over sovereignty, including China, Brunei, Darussalam, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan, and Vietnam. Although Southeast Asian claimants have conflicting claims with each other, there is no symmetry in power between the People's Republic of China and other claimants, and the broad scope of Beijing's assertion of being the sovereign power over most of the sea is the central feature of the disputes. China's claims over the South China Sea have historical and philosophical roots, but I'm not here to take sides. I'm just here to tell you what happened initially in the 1980s. Well, you see, at that time, the confrontation between the two world powers, the USSR and the USA, in the middle of the last century went, among other things, deep underwater. The Americans, in an atmosphere of high secrecy, sent their submarines with regular espionage missions to the shores of the Soviet Union, and of course the Soviet Navy acted the same. They responded in kind, as they like to say. At a certain point, despite the size of the world ocean, the submarines of the two states became, to put it mildly, cramped in it. There wasn't enough room to maneuver. Collisions occurred periodically. But there was another player in the Far East, a growing power. So what I'm about to tell you, there are several open sources for this story. One of them is the 2012 interview conducted by Russian journalist Pasko. The others are the publication in 2022. This year, in the Russian media, for some reason, the story has resurfaced. That means the Russian military is also paying attention to the sea in the Far East and whatever lurks under the surface. So, at the end of January 1983, at a depth of 54 meters, the K-10 nuclear-powered Soviet vessel grappled with an unknown object. The blow was so strong that the captain of the first rank, Valery Medvedev, who commanded the submarine, ordered to raise the alarm and seal the first string compartments. Let's see why the Soviet sub was in the area at all, to start with. So on January 22, 1983, K-10 was in the South China Sea. Combat service went on as usual, and as they write in such cases, nothing for shadow trouble. The depth under the keel was 4,500 meters. It was Saturday. After a washing, the personnel of the submarine watched a feature film in the first compartment. The area designated for communication was approached 8 hours earlier than the deadline. The district itself had to be entered at a strictly appointed time. So the submarine K-10, Project 675, was on combat duty at that time. The situation on the ship was calm. The assigned tasks were carried out in accordance with a pre-established plan. The crew was entering the designated area and preparing for the communication session. Again, the vessel was at the depth of 54 meters. So the commander decided to conduct a maneuver to check the absence of enemy tracking. The essence of such a maneuver is that the boat turns sharply and begins to follow the reverse course for some time. If someone was sitting on the tail of the submarine, then it was possible to calculate it only by performing such a maneuver. After the U-turn, in case of detection of an object carrying out surveillance, the submarines would have already changed roles. Those who performed the maneuver began to follow. At that time, there were no suspicions that someone was actually following the K-10. A sharp reversal on the reverse course, I think the Americans called it the Mad Ivan maneuver, had to be done periodically. This was required by the order of higher authorities. Acoustics reported that the horizon was clear, so no one expected a collision. Nevertheless, it happened. Commander Medvedev decided to check the absence of tracking by the anti-submarine forces of the United States and Japan. So, again, when turning to the reverse course, he received relevant reports from hydroacoustics that everything was clean. So, but suddenly there was a jolt, a feeling as if the boat had collided with some kind of an obstacle. The blow was soft but powerful. The entire hull of the submarine shuddered violently from the collision. K-10, as if grappling with an unknown object, moved with it for some time. Then they uncoupled. An emergency alarm was immediately announced. The first three forward compartments were sealed together with people inside them. Over the loudspeaker, Medvedev requested the first compartment. In response, he got deafening silence. One can imagine the feelings of the commander at this moment. Meanwhile, the boat was on its course and a given depth with a slight drop in speed. The trim on the nose slightly increased. So Medvedev said the following in the 2012 interview. I was constantly requesting the first compartment. From the impact of the collision, the sailors probably got a lot of stress. It was necessary to find out the situation. After 2 minutes, which seemed to me an eternity, a report passed from the first compartment. The compartment is airtight. At 24 hours and 31 minutes, they surfaced in the surface position. A typhoon was raging over the sea. The monstrous force of the wind and huge waves threw the boat like a small chip. The nights in those latitudes are dark. Maybe that's why, examining the sea through periscope optics, Medvedev, according to him, saw nothing. He gave the command to return to the point of collision. Arriving there, he, the navigator, and the signalman saw the orange, flashing light of the retreating submarine. After 30 to 40 seconds, the fire, that light, disappeared. Medvedev reported the collision and was ordered to proceed in a surface position to the Cam Ranh base located in South Vietnam. There, the K-10 was examined by divers. They recorded severe damage in the bow and also found metal parts of the unidentified object that the submarine collided with. It was concluded that the vessel carrying out surveillance of the K-10 must have sunk, but none of the countries had issued a statement about the accident that happened to their submarine. So foreign powers did not announce that they lost anything. It's interesting. So it was a soft blow, but there was severe damage in the bow. Let's remember it. Medvedev repeated several times, this is the first time I am talking about the flashing lights of a submarine I have seen. Then the Russian submariner fell silent during the interview. Apparently he was remembering those difficult moments. He mentally returned to that area hundreds of times and tried to figure out which boat the collision occurred with. He came to the conclusion that it was with the Chinese. However, it was not immediately possible to establish exactly with whom the submariners from the USSR shared the expenses of the South China Sea with in this adversarial fashion, so to say. And again, not a single state reported accidents in the Pacific region that year. Accidents and catastrophes, as a rule, were not described in the media during Cold War, and even after the war it was customary to classify everything. And then there was no internet and WikiLeaks, and sailors, by force of habit, are not inclined to stir up the past. But even though it is very late, the truth is trying to come out, so an oily spot pops up, signaling that an accident has occurred somewhere in the depths of the sea. And only the short-sighted will shrug off looking at the spot. The truth is not needed to dig into an old wound. It is needed at least to learn the lessons and prevent a repeat of the tragedy, and to find out if there is anyone else operating in the oceans of our planet besides the terrestrial powers, right? The hero of the Soviet Union, Vice Admiral Yevgeny Chernov, recalled a case when the Soviet K-306 submarine rammed the American Patrick Henry submarine so hard that it surfaced and its crew began to vigorously fight for survivability. Admiral Igor Kasatonov, in his memoirs The Fleet Went into the Ocean, writes, 20 underwater collisions, mostly due to the fault of the Americans, of course, have occurred recently. The heaviest was the K-19 ram on November 15, 1969, which laid the American boat Get-2 on the bottom of the Barents Sea. Then only a miracle saved the Americans from death. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of such examples. And in 1981, a collision occurred near the Kola Peninsula, during which an American submarine rammed the aft part of the Soviet strategic missile submarine K-211 with its wheelhouse. Russian journalist Grigory Pasko mentioned this. It seemed to him that during his conversation, Valery Nikolaevich Medvedev did not say everything. And here's why. In accordance with the decree of the government of the USSR of 1959, working drawings and technical documentations for Project 629 with the D-1 complex with R-11 FM missiles were prepared in the Central Design Bureau 16 from March to December 1959 for their transfer to the People's Republic of China. What is that interesting entity? St. Petersburg Marine Engineering Bureau Malachit is a design bureau in St. Petersburg established in 1974 as a result of the merger of SKB-143 and TCPB Volna TSKB-16, specializing in the developments of submarine projects, top secret and deadly submarines. By the autumn of 1960, the first of the Chinese Project 629 submarines was laid at the shipyard in Dalian, China, formerly Dalny, formerly Russian town. To accelerate its construction, Soviet designs were widely used, as well as equipment and mechanisms from the K-139 submarine. It was launched in May of 1960. The construction of the Chinese submarine was completed at the end of 1961, and it received the tail number of 200. At the same time, a submarine under the factory number 138 was in Komsomolsk on Amur. It was being prepared. After construction, the ship was transported in parts to China and commissioned at the end of 1962 under the number 208. Later, 2 years after the K-10 incident, it became known that in 1983, this Chinese submarine number 208 perished with the entire crew and a group of scientists and engineers during the tests of Chinese JL-1 ballistic missile. Considering that the Project 629 boats have a crew of about 100 people and that there was also a group of civilian specialists, we, at least Pasko, could only assume the exact number of victims. It is noteworthy that the Chinese side has not officially linked the collision with the demise of this boat. Now, the Russian media can say with almost absolute certainty that the submarine of the People's Republic of China was destroyed as a result of a collision with K-10. If the K-10 submarine had been at the collision point 5 seconds earlier, it might not have been lying at the depth of 4,500 meters. It might have been lying at the depth of 45 meters this time. But again, I do not have that absolute certainty. It looks like the Russian media, as if on command, is coming up with this story. Why in 2022? Interesting. Medvedev, of course, immediately reported the collision to the fleet. In response, it was ordered to proceed in a surface position to the Cam Ranh base, that's the former American base, located in South Vietnam. They were escorted by a large anti-submarine ship Petropavlovsk. When examining the boat for this purpose, a trim was created on the stern. It turned out that its bow has severe damage. Pieces of foreign metal were found among the mangled bow of the K-10. The keel steel track K-10, with a thickness of 30 millimeters and a length of about 32 meters, was cut off like a razor during the collision. After inspecting the submarine, the fleet command decided that in an emergency condition it could overcome 4,500 kilometers to the main base in an underwater position, forcing the passage of the Ba-Shi, Okinawa and the Korean Strait in a surface position. Of course, it was almost madness with such damage and in underwater position. But an order is an order, without acoustic stations, almost by touch. But they did cross or passed those 4,500 kilometers. Medvedev was confident in his crew, and the crew did not let their commander down. For such a transition under different circumstances, the sailors would have been rewarded, but not this time. This time, the commander-in-chief of the USSR Navy, Gorshkov, announced a penalty to Medvedev. You read my book about USOs to find out the role of the Gorshkov in the creation of the special scientific Soviet teams to study the USOs that they had encountered throughout different oceans. Anyway, only a couple of years later, after the incident, a Chinese newspaper mentioned the death of Chinese scientists while testing an underwater vessel. But there is no doubt that the Soviet submarine collided with the Chinese one, at least to Russian newspaper people, reporters. Well, by themselves, not only the details of that case came up, but also the questions: how could this happen? Complex hydrology in the area, poor capabilities of hydroacoustic stations, poor preparation of hydroacoustics, the presence of the so-called blind or dead zones. Why did the crew of the Chinese boat make the same mistakes? It is known that there was an investigation of the causes of the accident by the specialists of the Commission of Technical Management of the Soviet Pacific Fleet, and of course the Navy. Why in this case even the submarines of the Pacific Fleet did not know about it? There is an opinion of a participant in those events. Alexander Dobrogorsky served on the K-10, and on that day he was acting as a mechanical engineer on duty. Here's what he wrote to the Russian journalist. As far as I remember, and a lot of time has passed since then, we started circulating to the left and a blow followed. That is a collision. So they, the Chinese, they were sitting on our tail. Or it's a fatal accident, which I don't believe. The world ocean is too big for such accidents. Why didn't the Chinese figure out our maneuver? That means circulation. God only knows. Most likely they had poorly prepared sonar. As far as I know, when tracking submarines, for the depth should be different, and there should be a certain distance to the object when a submarine tracks a submarine, so that in case of anything it would be possible to have time to make an anti-maneuver. But this did not happen that time. 2 grains of sand met in the boundless depths. It's just a phenomenon of some kind. Upon arrival in Cambran, members of the State Commission were already waiting for us. They didn't let us go to the pier. They anchored us. A boat with members of the Commission and divers came up. No one was allowed up. The specialist examined everything. The findings of the inspection were not reported to us. Medvedev seems to have been denied enrollment in the Naval Academy. He was not given the promotion and was reprimanded on behalf of the Commander-in-Chief of the Navy. After returning to Pavlovsk, they began to cut out the mutilated torpedo tubes, the covers of which were torn off at the moment of the impact. And there were torpedoes with nuclear weapons on board. After talking with some other submariners, it turned out that the senior member on board of the K-10 was the chief of staff of the 21 division of the submarine, Captain Second Rank Krylov. After the collision of the boats, an employee of the special department, meaning Naval Counterintelligence, arrested the logs of the central post and those of the navigator. Anyway, Krylov had a long conversation with that special agent. As a result of the private conversation, it was decided to rewrite these logbooks. They even rewrote the log of the sub's main power plant, because the high-speed mode of the submarine, when following it to the combat duty area, was severely violated, and the boat arrived in the area 3 hours earlier. It was impossible to enter the patrol area earlier. That's why we hung around until we ran into the Chinese. And here's the opinion of the former commander of the submarine, Viktor Bondarenko, with whom Pasko met in the city of Obninsk. Valery Nikolaevich Medvedev did everything right. Why he approached the area earlier, there were some reasons for this, whatever, but these are his problems. The bad thing is that there are no time parameters when they collided, when they returned to the collision site, what were the speeds, etc. The Chinese diesel submarine could be tracking, let's put it this way, that a Chinese diesel submarine could be tracking a nuclear-powered vessel is something only an amateur can surmise. The Chinese conducted the next stage of testing. Their crew has not been worked out or prepared. They had generally been forbidden to be distracted by unusual tasks, except for tests. Even if they found a Soviet nuclear-powered ship, they had to radio it to the shore and continue their work. What the submarines had in common was that, according to their technical characteristics, they had almost identical acoustic stations. Well, the crew of the K-10 was well prepared, and the maneuver to check the aft course angles is very responsible, and the acoustics are very attentive to this. So let's think, once the boats collided, it means that they were at the same depth, 54 meters. Further, Medvedev says that at that time a storm was raging upstairs, and if so, then the noises of both submarines were masked by the noises of the sea. In this situation, even good acoustics and an excellent sonar technician will not distinguish the noise of a submarine from the noise of the sea. This is the axiom. Medvedev notes that after surfacing, he found this orange flashing light. So the Chinese boat also surfaced, and why it sank after that is a question. If she did not drown after the collision but surfaced and then drowned, this is completely incomprehensible. It means that they did something wrong, because there are no miracles. If everything was so difficult, then after the collision they would have gone to the bottom like a stone. So Valery Nikolaevich has no need to hang all the dogs on himself, as we say in Russian, or take full blame for what happened. Well, again, 2 years after the incident with K-10, it became known that the Chinese vessel number 208 with the entire crew and a group of scientists and engineers on board, more than 100 people, died or perished during the tests. But the Chinese leadership has not officially linked the collision of the Soviet boat with the demise of its own submarine. It is possible that due to the unwillingness to attract the attention of the world community to their underwater activities. Look, you can hang all the dogs if you want on whoever you want. It looks to me like the Soviets entered the area where they were not supposed to be early, and the Chinese were in the area, but it's very, to me, implausible that the two submarines of completely different qualities would meet like that, and then there was a soft blow, and this orange light, I've heard stories about orange lights down below. Look, I've collected reports about USOs, unidentified submersible objects, for many years, and it's in my book and in my videos, and I keep attention to the events in the Far East, especially South China Sea lately. Anyway, in 2021, Chinese scientists say that they have tested a monitoring device in the South China Sea that can improve detection of underwater currents believed to be a big danger to submarines. Maybe. They're doing a lot of things down below. Here's what also is interesting. On October 2nd of 2021, incident where a U.S. nuclear attack submarine was damaged in the South China Sea after an underwater collision. Beijing would not let go of the issue, citing the potential for dangerous nuclear leakage and Washington's lack of transparency and responsibility over the incident, which injured 11 sailors aboard. That submarine, USS Connecticut, had crashed into an underwater mountain, according to the explanation, in the South China Sea on October 2nd. Look, there were more details revealed about this incident. The U.S. Navy announced the firing of the captain and other leaders of the USS Connecticut. The U.S. Navy 7th Fleet cited that the commanders have been relieved due to the loss of confidence. So, the dogs continually hang on somebody. Anyway, I think we'll look a little bit later. In 2016, I want to go back. Chinese researchers claim to have found the world's deepest underwater sinkhole, located near the hotly disputed islands in the South China Sea. Also known as a blue hole, it measures 988 feet, I believe it's 300 meters, in depth, far surpassing the previous record held by Dean's Blue Hole in the Bahama Islands, which is 202 meters deep. Over 20 fish species and marine organisms were also found in the upper levels of the hole, but with almost no oxygen below 100 meters, no life was found, or at least they didn't report whether they found any life, similar to our own or something else. Traditionally known as Long Dong or Dragon Hole, locals have been calling this sinkhole the Eye of the South China Sea, with some believing it is a reference in the 16th century Chinese classic Journey to the West. In April of 2021, we also learned that China has drilled deep in the South China Sea to retrieve sediment core from the seabed, according to their state media. This is amid tensions over disputed waters with rival claimants Taiwan and the Philippines, of course, as well as the United States. What else? I found this very interesting, that the Chinese scientists on marine research vessel used China's homemade Sea Bull 2 drilling system to obtain a sediment core 231 meters long at a depth of 2,060 meters. Wow. So what happened to the Americans? Let's look at it a little bit closer detail. So a U.S. Navy submarine collides with an underwater object in the South China Sea, and that's October of 2021. So it was a U.S. nuclear-powered submarine. It struck an unidentified object in international waters in South China in an incident that injured nearly a dozen sailors. That's how it begins. The Navy statement said that the boat's nuclear propulsion plant was not affected by the collision. The extent of damage to the remainder of the submarine was being assessed, according to the 7th Fleet. The statement did not say exactly where the underwater collision took place, only that it was in international waters. The 7th Fleet's statement said that the Navy had not requested assistance, while a Department of Defense official said the submarine had steamed to Guam on the surface. A U.S. official confirmed that the Connecticut had arrived in the port. The U.S. Navy reported that its nuclear-powered submarine that was damaged when it collided with an object in the South China Sea had in fact struck an uncharted seamount or an underwater mountain. The 7th Fleet, which operates in the Western Pacific, reported that its investigation concluded that the USS Connecticut had smashed into a geological formation and not another vessel on October 2nd. The investigation determined USS Connecticut grounded on an uncharted seamount while operating in international waters, according to them. The USS Connecticut SSN-22 is a Sea-Wolf-class nuclear-powered fast attack submarine. The collision reportedly caused a small number of moderate and minor injuries to the crew. All were treated by Navy corpsmen aboard the vessel, and none of the sailors had to be taken off the sub. The Navy did not report the incident for 5 days, likely in part because it had been unclear whether the SC Wolf-class fast attack submarine had struck. They were not clear who it struck. The U.S. Navy again fired the commanding officer, executive officer, and top enlisted sailor of this nuclear-powered submarine, saying the accident was preventable. You know what? I do not believe it was a seamount that they had struck. I do not believe that in 1983 the Soviets and the Chinese collided. In an earlier video, I presented my views about the underwater creature that I believe had been attacking submarines in the South China Sea. Probably something like that exists 100 meters from the bottom or entrance of the sinkhole. Further research is needed, but who will conduct it in the sea where war is about to explode? Probably the military. But I strongly believe the more I find out about all of this, we are dealing with USOs. Whose ships they are, I do not know. Based on my research, I believe that China, Russia, and the United States are aware of another presence in the South China Sea, another intelligence, another civilization that may not be open or to the recent developments in the area, may not be welcoming all the military presence there. You can call them aliens, you can call them remnants of a once powerful terrestrial civilization that now resides at the bottom of our oceans. And you may want to reread Mahabharata of ancient India, which specifies which races and how many reside and fight down below. I have delved into this in my and Philip Mantle's book, Russia's USO Secrets. I also believe the recent build-up of the military assets of the People's Republic of China and the United States have nothing to do with the visit by Nancy Pelosi to Taiwan, but everything to do with a hostile presence down below. So keep your eyes on that faraway sea. And if you have time, read Journey to the West, a Chinese novel published in the 16th century during the Ming Dynasty and attributed to Wu Cheng'an. It is regarded as one of the classic Chinese novels and has been described as arguably the most popular literary work in East Asia. And read news items and see what's going on out there. I think we'll find out soon enough about other collisions in that area. So thank you for your attention to my work. If you can support me, please do it through the links in the description to this video. Please like my video. Please tell others, and I promise I'll bring you more interesting subjects soon.